Okay, today I'm going to be talking to you about chapter 23 of your Butts and Ritz textbook. And since you're learning how to cite folks, chapter is written by Purnell. And so that would be the author that you would cite of this chapter in the edited textbook of Butts and Rich. Our objectives today are that you identify components that are common to all theories, recognize common language in culture theories, recognize 6 culture theories common in nursing practice, research, and education, and there'll be an emphasis on 3 of these, and develop your own cultural self-awareness. So let's begin. Some cultural models of nursing are not intended for research, but they do have value used in education, practice, and administration. So recognize that we often think of other branches of science, such as social sciences, that examine cultures themselves. However, we all acknowledge the important role that culture plays in our ability to provide effective care to our clients. Remember, these are about all theories. They're not reality. They're abstract, they're complex, and they are used to generate research that can guide nursing practice. Now, theory is, remember, concrete or abstract concepts. Often, these are the empirical indicators that are derived from a conceptual model. And then there are propositions that describe those concepts themselves, either defining them alone or the relationships between 2 or more of the concepts. And these are the components that I hope you're learning to become more fluent in as we look at various theories in research articles to annotate each week. The 3 levels of nursing theory are grand theory, middle range theory, and practice theory. Remember that in any particular phenomena, including culture, we can have these 3 levels of theory within them. The theories have these components. They have a purpose, they have concepts that are linked, and they have assumptions that are either implied or explicitly stated. There's 4 types of theory. There's descriptive theories, and these identify properties and components of a discipline. They can talk about their meaning, observations, or even just that something exists. There are theories that explain, so they identify how properties and components relate to each other and end up explaining some particular function of our discipline. Several of you have looked at communication, for example. You might want to explain how that communication happens. Other theories are predictive, and so they and their components predict under what conditions a phenomenon will occur, and others end up being prescriptive. So they provide guidance on interventions related to, in our case, nursing. So those are the 4 types of theory. Remember, this is all just a review, but there's a variety of key terms in culture theory that includes cultural awareness. This is something that we all need to develop. It's ongoing. It's not like you arrive with cultural awareness. It's something you develop. A cultural sensitivity, which another way I like to describe that is just a desire to understand others. Cultural imposition, this is when something about a particular culture is in conflict with another culture. Cultural imperialism is when a culture is so dominant that it and has a superior element to it. Cultural relativism. And then there's ethnocentrism, when one can only see their own perspective or view on a particular cultural element. So here's some critical terms, and as you know, these are very much in our news and discussed by our society today. Stereotypes, that is when you take a few elements of a person's existence and make assumptions that you understand everything about this. This is very important in nursing education because we also often use kind of a general case to describe things. So we might talk about particular foods, for example, related to ethnic groups. But our society is much more complex than that. And some people who may identify with an ethnic group may never have actually consumed foods that are common to that ethnic group. And so that would be an example how a stereotype is expressed in nursing. There can be a generalization, and perhaps that's a better example of the example I gave, a stereotype, perhaps is a better example actually of a generalization. Stereotypes can sometimes have more negative connotations. Generalizations tend to be just the idea that something is normative based on perhaps an ethnicity. And then there is race, which again is not always clearly defined. And racism, I added a little more description here because this term is undergoing certainly a cultural almost like a cultural reformation of its meaning. But racism historically has been a belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. So these are basically a generalization that is then taken to actually a value level, so that a certain race is valued more than another. And of course, today we have the term systemic racism, which is a bit more complicated because generally systems themselves don't have beliefs, but people do. And so most of the time, isms are connected to beliefs. So when they say systemic racism, it is a bit of a conflicting term that is currently being defined in our culture. Then there's an ethnic group, and those are people that tend to have the same habits related to religion and food, other kinds of family traits. And there's stigma. This is when a certain behavior or group identity has a negative connotation to other groups. And culture, which is almost impossible to define. So you may try not to even define that. However, as an abstract, we know that culture has powerful unconscious impact on patients and health professionals. So it's important that we develop cultural self-awareness. Before we can understand the unique perspectives of our patients, we need to understand our own personal and professional knowledge, the things we value, our beliefs, our ethics, and life experiences. One of the ways that we can understand values is by looking at how we spend our time and our money. So if you look at those things, that's one way you can demonstrate what you value. There's other ways of understanding yourself, and sometimes that is by meeting and engaging with people that are different than you. So I hope that for us that we can have open discussions about these characteristics that we each have. We each have these, and understand that I acknowledge that we are all very different in our knowledge, values, beliefs, ethics, and life experiences. And by listening carefully and being open to learning from each other in our class, we can expand our cultural self-awareness. So if you are feeling that you are different than everyone in the class, you may be surprised that others may also have this feeling as well. Be sure to bring your differences as well as your similarities to the class, to your discussion of course concepts, so that we can grow in our self-awareness and then perhaps be more culturally sensitive to areas of differences among us. So here's several of these are 6 different cultural models that we're going to go through one by one, so I won't read them off here, but these are the 6 models that we'll be focusing on. The Campinha-Bacote model, and this model is the process of cultural competency and the delivery of healthcare services. This is commonly used in nursing practice and education. It's used quite a bit in undergraduate nursing education, and the models are cultural awareness, which we've discussed, cultural knowledge, cultural skill, cultural encounter, and cultural desire. And all of these have defining characteristics, and in education, they have strategies in order to help the RN as they practice cultural sensitivity in their nursing practice. Each person is seen as unique, kind of how I just described you, and you're influenced by culture, ethnicity, and religion. It focuses on the process of cultural competency and the delivery of healthcare, and so the models are awareness, knowledge, competency, and cultural sensitivity as being, I think of these things as being circular, but so as you gain one, others are influenced and changed. So be thinking about that as well as you conceptualize and read the model. And so I'm sorry, I went Campinha, the Davidhizar model is the one that focuses on these areas of assessment and intervention from a transcultural nursing perspective. And again, used in education, practice, administration, and research. The 6 areas in the model are communication. Many of you are interested in communication, space, social orientation, time, environmental control, and biological variations. So you can see these 6 areas align more with the meta paradigm of environment. So many of these have to do with environment in this model. Let's see. Then there's the Papadopoulos, Tilke, and Taylor model. And this one is the unique person, which we discussed, and those circular concepts. So I'm sorry that I got that slide out of order. So Leninger, very commonly discussed model, used quite a bit because of its holistic nature. The universally held and common understandings of care are central to this, so it's often considered a caring model as well. But culture is the pattern of behavior that distinguishes any society from others and gives meaning to human expressions of care. So notice there's many different descriptions of culture, but Leninger's looking at patterns of behavior that distinguish societies as her definition. The Purnell model for cultural competency is a grand theory. So it can also be considered a complexity theory. And you can see from its diagram in your textbook that there's a very detailed, large, and involved model. It's used in practice and education, and other non-nursing disciplines use it. You will see this quite a bit. So here are the assumptions. Let's dig a little deeper into this model. So here, one culture is not better than another. Check. I think that's something we can agree on. Core similarities are shared by all cultures. Check. Cultural change is slow over time. I'm not sure how much I feel like things rapidly have changed in our culture. Individuals and families belong to several subcultures. Yes, I feel strongly that that's true. Cultural awareness improves caregivers' self-awareness. Yes, that's true. And every client encounter is a cultural encounter. How true is that? So I agree with most of these assumptions. Major influences that shape an individual's worldview and identification with a group of origin. So these are the kinds of things like your nationality, your race, your gender, occupation, educational status, residence, marital status, migration, immigration status. All of these have an influence on an individual worldview and the group that they identify with. Some variant characteristics change over time, and stigma may occur if characteristics do change. So sometimes people, they're in and out groups within a particular culture because of changes in characteristics. So these are different cultural characteristics in the Purnell model. So it organizes around 12 domains: overview and heritage, communications, family roles and organization, workforce issues, biocultural ecology, high-risk health behaviors, nutrition, pregnancy, childbearing and family, death, spirituality, healthcare practices, and healthcare practitioners. So as you can see, these 12 domains lend themselves very well to health assessment, right? We could certainly ask about these different things, and depending on a person's self-awareness, they may or may not be able to answer questions surrounding this, or they may or may not understand how those answers influence their health care, the health care you provide. Check out these boxes for questions about each of those domains, and these could be used for research or for practice, so consider that. Individual, professional, cultural competency of the RN, it's a journey. It's not a skill that you can master. Most tools for measuring cultural competency are self-reported, so they're subjective. As we've learned, many people have said that they're not racist and been criticized for that self-assessment. And so outgroups may not agree with someone's self-assessment. There may be evidence for that they say that they're not racist. The other group may not accept that as evidence. So you can see the communication and the use of terms and terminology can be a point of conflict in society. Then there's individual cultural competence can be arbitrarily divided about cultural general, clinical, and language. So some people may speak the same language. We have a family member that speaks fluent Spanish. They're from the Monterrey area of Mexico, and yet they are culturally quite different, for example, from other Spanish-speaking groups within their society. So that a language alone does not define a cultural group. You could certainly see that with English as just as well. And then the clinical encounter itself, the healthcare system has its own culture. And so what people believe is normal there is going to influence an individual's cultural competency. And then organizations can be seen to have a cultural competency because of how they deliver and address care. So this may be something that if you become an administrator, you need to think about how your organization supports or does not support people of various cultural groups. So diversity and cultural competency are very complex. If it was easy to resolve these issues of inclusivity, we would have done it. We certainly want to. I believe that most people want to be inclusive, but actually achieving that is quite challenging. However, it's a necessity that the advanced practice RN work to become inclusive. So the Purnell model provides comprehensive guide. Advanced practice RNs work with multicultural patients and diverse staff. You can have excellent technical skills, but if you don't understand a patient's culture, the recommendations you make may not be followed, and there may be errors of communication and understanding. So thank you for joining this discussion and on Chapter 23, Models and Theories focused on cultural care.